Some years ago, my husband and I took a quick getaway trip to Greenville, South Carolina. We splurged on a fifth floor riverside room with a lovely deck. Reveling in a rare respite from parenting, we intended to sleep late on Saturday, but were awakened by the sounds of, as it turned out, a 5K race being run right outside our hotel. So Jay and I just went with the flow. We grabbed some coffee and we moved to the deck to watch the race. It turned out to be a tragic comedy. A slew of runners, all very serious, huffed and puffed by. But apparently the course was not marked adequately because we saw the same runners running back a few minutes later, frustrated, confused, and angry, trying desperately to find the correct route. Those runners had trained. They were running as hard as they could. They thought things were going really well, but in reality, many of them were going in exactly the wrong direction. I've devoted the last 20 years of my life working with incarcerated people and people coming home from jail and prison. I've devoted thousands of hours toward the goal of freedom for all. Over these years, like those unfortunate racers, I have to admit I have taken my share of wrong turns, gone in what turned out to be the wrong direction. So today I wanted to share some reflections with you about how I went off course in my advocacy work and offer what might be some takeaways that perhaps will apply to your justice journeys. When I was in seminary, I did an internship at a federal prison for women. Behind stark prison walls, I heard stories from female prisoners of our nation's drug war. I knew before going in about the prison industrial complex. I knew statistics like the fact that the US has only 4% of the world's population, but a quarter of its prisoners. I knew people of color were incarcerated at a much higher rate. I'm going to trust that you too, as good Unitarian Universalists, are informed about the prison industrial complex. I will trust that you have watched or will watch the documentary 13th, that you have read or will read the new Jim Crow, Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. So for our purposes today, I'm going to leave statistics and information mostly behind. I will tell you that at that federal prison for me, statistics were suddenly made flesh. People that our society had cast behind locked gates were sitting with me, breathing, laughing, weeping. Prisoners of the drug war suddenly had faces and names and stories. One of them showed me a picture. This is my daughter, Ebony. She's 10 today, but I haven't seen her since she was 3 because my mom can't afford to bring her here. One woman shared with me how she started dealing drugs after she finally had the courage to leave the abuser who almost killed her. How, of course, she didn't want to sell drugs, but there were no jobs in her neighborhood, especially now that she had a criminal record. I felt called by these women to do something, to do anything. I wanted to save them and prevent this from happening to other human beings. Now, I was in my mid-20s and just oozing with idealism. My intentions, I trusted, were pure, and I was willing to put in the work. So, what could go wrong? I made a documentary about prisoners, spoke around the country, giving voice to the voiceless. I taught and still teach life skills classes in the Mecklenburg County Jail, bringing my knowledge and my education to uplift the women there. I don't think I had ever heard the term white savior when I started my work. Since then, I've studied Robin DiAngelo's book, White Fragility. I understand now that in books like To Kill a Mockingbird and The Help, and movies like The Blind Side and Dances with Wolves, we're enculturated by this notion that poor people, people of color, need help, and it's us good white folks who are the natural ones to do the helping. The white savior model, unfortunately, reinforces the fallacy that people of color can't help themselves. Now that I know this, looking back, I have to say, is a little cringy, because now I can see how much of my work was pursued with this white savior lens. A decade ago, I created a social business, a restaurant and catering company called Second Helping. I knew that people needed jobs coming out of prison. I knew it was hard to get a job with a record, so I figured let's create some jobs. I worked relentlessly to raise the money for Second Helping. And indeed, we created 9 jobs. The media ate up the former prisoners making good story. I gave tons of television and print interviews, including in the UU world. But behind the scenes, it was a disaster. We were barely making payroll. We weren't able to pay livable wage jobs to the women. Morale was awful. Trying to get some help, I connected with community volunteers who might be able to help save the business. Monique, our formerly incarcerated catering manager, who I thought of as a dear friend, called me out after one particularly frustrating meeting. She said, "Melissa, do you realize that you bring in white volunteers into our meetings and you take their ideas way more seriously than you take us employees, even though we're the ones who are doing the work every day? Do you realize we've been trying to tell you our ideas, but you don't listen to them? And you wonder why everybody has a bad attitude? You're too busy trying to get into the paper to pay attention." I asked her to tell me more. And she did. 4 hours. It was one of the hardest conversations of my life, but probably the most helpful. Feminist icon Gloria Steinem tells a story about taking a field trip with her geology class in college. She saw a giant turtle out in the field, and this turtle had climbed out of the river and then crossed a road and was seemingly stuck in the mud in an embankment. Steinem was alarmed that it appeared the turtle could crawl out at any time, and if it did, it would risk getting run over by a car. So, being a good codependent with the world, she says, I tugged and pulled until I managed to carry this huge, heavy, angry, snapping turtle off the embankment and down the road. Steinem's professor rushed over and said, "Did you ask the turtle before you moved it? That turtle probably spent a week crawling up that dirt road to lay its eggs in the mud by the side of the road, and you just put it back in the river." The takeaway for Steinem was always ask the turtle. My conversation with Monique and the subsequent failure of Second Helping was a huge turning point for me. I hadn't listened to the very people I so desperately wanted to help. I had just assumed that with my fancy degrees, I knew better. Had I started listening to them from the beginning, had I actually planned the business with their involvement, everything might have turned out differently. But instead, we failed. That's one takeaway. If we engage in social justice work or advocacy work, we are going to fail. We'll fail in our relationships with people. We'll fail in our campaigns. We'll accidentally ooze racist enculturation into our efforts, as I did. Some of our goals won't be achieved. And it feels really crummy to fail. Like those demoralized runners who realize they wasted precious time and energy running the wrong way. It'd be easy just to bail out, chuck it all. Author John C. Maxwell said, "Fail early, fail often, but always fail forward." Failing forward is about learning from mistakes, getting up, trying again, even when, especially when, we realize we've gone off course. I wondered after hearing from Monique and second helping failing, how I could stay in the work but change the way I did it. So if being a white savior was misguided and ultimately harmful, but I still wanted to help, how could that look? I got an answer at a conference in California when I heard Dorsey Nunn speak. Dorsey Nunn served 12 years for murder when he was young. He told the audience in real, raw, and captivating language that when he got out of prison, he realized there was very little help for him or people like him to make new lives. So he took it upon himself. He started an organization called All of Us or None. All of Us or None address voting rights, education, employment, and housing for people with criminal records. Their Ban the Box campaign seeks to eliminate questions about past incarceration on job and housing applications. The campaign, created by people with records, for people with records, has been successful in dozens of cities, multiple states, and major corporations. Dorsey Nunn is not alone in taking his lived experience of incarceration and parlaying it into effective action. Susan Burton was in prison 6 times before she finally got out and got clean. She started a new way of life in Los Angeles and runs 12 homes for women coming out of prison. Closer to home, a friend of mine, Amanda Martin, was once a sex worker and heroin addict and armed robber. Great resume. But now she's a drug court advocate and just got accepted to law school. My friend Christy was once a crack addict and took parenting classes at the jail where I teach. Now she's the state director of an ACLU project that is working to put an end to cash bail. Josh did 2 years in solitary confinement. He came out and started a trucking business that actually succeeded, unlike my job. He created dozens of livable wage jobs. Amanda, Christy, Susan, Dorsey, Josh, and so many others who have actually walked the walk of incarceration and oppression have become my heroes, my teachers, my guides. My new rule became, and continues to be, learn from, follow, and support the people closest to the problem, because they are the closest to the solution. I now ask myself, how can I leverage my privilege and position to amplify and advance and, oh, by the way, help fund the work of advocates with lived experience. I no longer see myself as being a voice for the voiceless, because advocates with lived experience have clear, wise, profound voices. We just haven't been listening to them. My latest adventure is being part of a scrappy new grassroots organization called Reentry Housing Alliance. My co-director and friend, Chablis Dandridge, served 13 years in federal prison. When we held a recent news conference to advocate for more housing with people with records in Charlotte, I made sure that Chablis' face, not mine, was splashed on the front page. Chablis and others with lived experience chart the course for every activity, and I now work to connect others, including Unitarian Universalists, with resources to his vision. Recently, Chablis trained a large group of UU volunteers to cold call landlords in a search for those who are willing to rent to people with records. So now we have this big, beautiful database so that people in Charlotte don't have to wade through who's going to rent to me. And so they're saving thousands of dollars in application fees. It's fun stuff now. A lot of my work over the years felt really heavy. I was shooting all over myself about what needed to be done in the world and carrying this burden of leadership like a cross to bear. But now that I work with Chablis and others with lived experience, I'm having so much more fun. I learn something every day, and I almost always come away from our meetings energized and rejuvenated. You've probably heard of the concept of Ikigai based on a Japanese philosophy. The phrase is made up of two Japanese words, iki, meaning life, and kai, a result or fruit that is worthwhile or beneficial. So when combined, it's roughly translated as something that makes life worth living. Ikigai is found at the intersection of one's sense of purpose and feeling of joy and well-being. After 20 years filled with lots of twists and turns and going off course, I've finally found my Ikigai, joy and a sense of purpose. I'm finally convinced, at least for now, I'm on the right path. I wish this for each one of us who longs to change the world. I want to bring us back to the words of Valerie Kaur, who you heard earlier. She says, your calling is when your passion meets the world's needs. But you don't hear your calling behind thick walls. You need to go to the places where the world needs you. But she says, and this is the key, do not go to save the people you find there. Go to be saved by them. For in those places, you will find your greatest teachers on love and life and courage. May it be so.